Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today, July 13th, 2021. Can I have a motion to go into special session?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The approval of increase to ASME Local 1540 pay scale effective July 12th, 2021.
Mayor, I hereby move for mayor and council approval the increase to the attached, which one we doing first? I'm
1540.
sorry. Approval the increase to the attached ASME Local 1540 pay scale to be effective July 12th, 2021. Funding for fiscal year 22 is from general fund contingency and enterprise fund budgets as approved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have the approval of increase to non-union pay scale effective July 12th, 2021.
Madam Mayor, I hereby move for mayor and council approval of the increase to the attached non-union pay scale by 1.75% to be effective July 12th, 2021. Funding for FY '22 is from general fund contingency and enterprise fund budgets as approved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now go into our regular work session here. First, we have the review of new office lease for Boroughbox at 60 West Washington Street. Jill?
Good afternoon, and I would like to introduce Chris Simmerling. And Chris joined our team last week as our new economic development specialist, and he's going to walk through this proposed lease for the Boroughbox.
We have received an applicant for the Boroughbox by the name of Baba Tarawali. He is going to be representing Goshen Investment Properties, which is currently a home-based business and hoping to establish a office as a tenant with us. They are going to be looking to do a month-to-month lease, which is going to be $100 a month for a approximately 100 square feet office at the Boroughbox. Right now, they are a real estate company looking to do some investment in the area and hope to expand their business from there.
And we had previously brought forward a lease that didn't move forward, so we did have a vacancy and an interest, and so this will fill that. The business is interested in going in as quickly as possible, and so if this is acceptable to you, we would have it on the special session for next Tuesday, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
You guys good?
Good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome, Chris.
Welcome.
Yes, welcome to
Thank
the
you.
team.
Thanks for having me.
It gets harder, Chris, and the more you come up here, it gets harder.
We have the Invest Hagerstown City Center redevelopment grant application for 1721 East Franklin Street.
The applicant is WLR Residential Properties. This is for the property at 1721 East Franklin, or the Roslyn Building. The requested grant amount is for our City Center redevelopment grant at the $250,000 level. The estimated total project cost is over $1.2 million. The project is underway in June with an expected completion in January of 2022. And we recommend setting a completion deadline with contingency of July 1st of 2022. And this project also is taking advantage of the student housing grant, so they are layering both Invest Hagerstown and the student housing grant, as we did with another downtown property, the student housing grant being funded from the community legacy funding. And happy to answer any questions about this application.
You guys have any questions or good with it?
I'm good with it.
Okay,
Thank you.
that was easy.
Nancy's not here yet, so if you want to go to Brooke, she's here.
Okay. Brooke, we're gonna skip to you for the grant coordinator position.
Hello.
Hello.
I am here tonight to request approval to hire a grant coordinator to help oversee and manage the American Rescue Plan Act funding. As you all know, the city was awarded $20.4 million through this package. $10.4 million was received earlier this year, and the city is slated to receive another $10.2 million next year. And while this funding is going to make an extremely positive impact on our community, we anticipate the administrative side of it to stretch our department and other departments as well extremely thin. So we are proposing to hire a full-time temporary grant coordinator whose term would expire on December 31st, 2024, which aligns with the end of the funding period. I've included a copy of the job description, but just to summarize, duties would include things such as coordinating grant committee meetings and taking minutes, research and analysis, compiling documentation, monitoring for compliance, coordinating with other organizations, mayor and council updates, and filing reports with the U.S. Treasury. And finally, this position will be funded through the American Rescue Plan Act as it is considered an eligible expense. And we have it graded as an MG 15. Any questions?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
Reading even the most recent updates that came out in the last week, especially as it relates to the utility infrastructure projects, which I don't know whether at the end of the day, once the final rule comes out, how much that's going to apply to us. But there's a sentence here under experience and skills that says work requires considerable independent judgment subject to the established policies and procedures. Is that referring to independent judgment as it applies to the policies and procedures that are going to be laid out by the final rule for ARPA? Or is that as it relates to their duties, within the office?
We could modify that a little bit.
I-
This was kind of like a template type that we kind of went in and,
I just wouldn't want to be the person applying for this temporary position with what appears to me to read as if to suggest they're going to be sort of interpreting, the ARPA regs, because I think that's asking an awful lot of anybody.
yeah, I think that would be,
Anybody can interpret.
yeah, that would be a
No, that's
collaborative
why I
effort
said
for sure.
that sentence
I think
read
she-
a little weird to me, because I was like, man, I don't want to
think-
be that person.
I think she'll be able to make certain assumptions that she would come to us and ask, and then also we have several resources at the government level that would be able to help us.
Yeah.
Congressman Trone's office, he's already offered up one of his staff that is very in on this, on the ARP, so.
Okay.
You guys have any other questions for Brooke?
No.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Lauren just
Is- Okay, John's here, right? Yeah. Lauren.
and there's Lauren.
We're gonna do the proposed guidelines for the CDBG funded micro enterprise grant program. And now
Oh, I know, we're a little ahead of speed.
Yeah.
What a tight time.
text Joey.
Good afternoon. So during previous work session discussions and approval of the Community Development Block Grant Action Plan for fiscal year 2022, we had reserved some of our CDBG funding in this fiscal year for a new program, which would be a micro enterprise assistance program. And Lauren's going to take you through some of the steps of how we researched some other communities who've done these programs and how we built the guidelines. And the goal would be to obtain feedback tonight from the mayor and council on any questions or concerns with the proposed guidelines to assist some of the smallest businesses that would operate in the city. And then if everything is looking okay, or if we need to make any adjustments, we would hopefully have this up and running very soon with a formal approval at an upcoming regular session. So, Lauren?
So I'll go over a couple of the eligibility criteria for the grant. So a lot of these are kind of the standard criteria for a lot of our grants. So you have to be located within the city of Hagerstown, be in good standing with the city and the state, and also be in compliance with the land management code. There's a couple that are specific to this grant that I'll highlight. So the first is the operation time. So we don't actually have a operation time frame for this grant. If you've been operating for under 12 months, we do request that they submit a business plan in addition to some form of documentation of a consultation with a counseling service, just so we make sure they are prepared for business and make sure there's longevity there. The other two are specific more to the Cdbg requirements of this and to HUD specifically. In terms of a microenterprise, it has to be 5 or fewer total employees within the business. That's a total headcount, including the owner themselves. And they must also meet the income requirements for the household in general of the owner. So you'll see a chart in the application as well as in the memo that kind of highlights the maximum income that each person needs to meet in order to qualify for the grant. And those are the specific eligibility criteria that hits for a microenterprise to be qualified with the Cdbg funding. Are there any questions about any of those specific criteria? Sorry, I'm out of breath from running over here.
And to note, we did confirm that with,
Are you okay? Goodness.
we did confirm that with HUD. That is a strict CDBG requirement, as we were discussing internally about full-time equivalents and part-time,
Right.
and that was specific, that it's not based on any full-time equivalent, it's just head count, maximum 5 employees. And again, I think a lot of the businesses that are targeted for these types of CDBG microenterprise programs could be your sole proprietors or one-person businesses. And we've had back and forth communication as well recently with Herb Melrath with Small Business Development Center on these types of programs. He was excited about this type of opportunity. A lot of the small business clients that he sees especially could be a tie-in or a good startup resource for a program he called the, I think, PA2E program, which is a state program that works with citizens that are maybe on stamp assistance, and they would be low to moderate income citizens that are looking to maybe start a business. And those types of entities that they work with the state and Herb's Small Business Development Center outfit, that these could be startup grants for those types of entrepreneurs. And Herb mentioned businesses such as lawn care business, hairstylist, apparel or t-shirt printing, food vendors, housekeeping, handyman service, could be a home-based daycare business. So these are the types of businesses that we are looking at with this type of program. It's not limited to that. Those are just some of the examples. One thing we did want to point out, and something that we could possibly require adjustment to the guidelines, is this type of program targets the sole proprietor or those entrepreneurs that are just very few employees, roving businesses, food trucks, an ice cream truck, some type of food vendor, or maybe a roving housekeeping service. One concern about that is those types of businesses obviously could be going outside of the city limits. So if we should maybe get more specific in the guidelines to say you're predominantly doing business in the city of Hagerstown. Again, we're looking at grants of $5,000, which is a very modest amount. So it's not a large grant to say, we're giving $50,000, so you're always operating in the city. It's a small grant. Maybe it's a term saying predominantly operating in the city, and we would put the onus on the applicant to show us that data. So I don't know if there's any feedback on that concern, because I think this type of program, you would definitely see possibly those food vendor type, food truck type opportunities for micro enterprise that would qualify.
Yeah, and I apologize because I missed going over the eligible uses of the funding, so I'll just review that very quickly for you. So in terms of what is actually eligible, is we're looking more in terms of working capital and those sorts of items. So it could be acquisition of equipment, purchase of inventory, necessary fixed assets, professional services, that could be marketing or business promotion, technological infrastructure upgrades, entrepreneurial or business training for the owner or staff, or just operation expenses like payroll, utilities, rent or mortgage for commercial locations. This would not be eligible for real property improvements or rehabilitation, political activities, sectarian activities, which is more of HUD regulations. It would not be eligible for residential-based rent, mortgage, or utilities, repayment of existing debt, or reimbursement of costs incurred prior to grant approval. So that's more of a scope of what would be eligible under the grant itself.
I like the idea of changing the terminology to predominantly in the city. I think we can reach more people
Okay.
that way, if you guys agree.
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
So, I like the idea of changing the terminology to does business predominantly in the city.
And
You guys-
would 2/3 be a good number for that? I think approximately 2/3 of your business is in the city of Hagerstown.
I think so. You guys have any questions for Jonathan or Lauren?
And as
Good
a,
opportunity.
yeah, as a new program, I think our goal would be to maybe come back later in the fiscal year, provide an update to say, hey, maybe there's a few things we need to edit with the guidelines, if there's maybe some additional barriers, or maybe there's a target of audience that we're not capturing, but maybe back halfway through the fiscal year, we'll report back and provide updates on how this goes. But I think we're excited. It's another opportunity for those working capital grants that can maybe help sustain or maybe boost the business to grow.
Absolutely, I love this. Thank you guys
Yeah,
for your
thank
work
you.
on it.
Thank you very much. We'll be back for regular session vote on the formal guideline approval. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right, up next we have Nancy for the request authorization to amend contract with Hazen and Sawyer. Hi.
Good afternoon. We're here, the chief and I are here to discuss essentially some of what's going on with the BlackRock development and what would be required as far as the water system and the wastewater system is concerned. In the memo that was provided, and I won't go into detail on all of it, but in the memo that was provided, essentially the number of EDUs has doubled for BlackRock. And in the master plan that was completed in draft format in the 2008-2009 time period, looked at what the flow was then and what a predicted flow out to 2025. And so what's projected right now will exceed the 2025. So that triggers some action, if you will, on our behalf. And that action is essentially taking a comprehensive look at the water system for Zone 5, which includes also looking at Zone 1 because Zone 1 feeds, it's our base zone, and also looking at Zone 4. That comprehensive evaluation looks at average day usage, domestic usage. It looks at peak day domestic usage, and would also look at fire flow. We all know that there's major fire flow issues in the BlackRock area, and the master plan as it's currently written is indicating that for the build-out that was looking at the build-out for BlackRock when the plan was developed was looking at a fire flow at 3,500 gallons per minute sustained for 2 hours. And that is much more consistent with current fire code, but very inconsistent with what was done when BlackRock was, when the subdivision was originally built. There's been a lot of changes in fire code. So, that's one of the things that we're going to ask for tonight is a comprehensive look at the water system to take those things into consideration. The other thing we're going to request permission to do is to also look at the wastewater system. We have not done a master plan for the wastewater system since the 80s. And so if this subdivision is to move forward, we want to make sure that we have not only the capacity in the gravity system, but the capacity in what we call the force mains, the pump station. We don't want to, after it's built, be at capacity and then need to do something in our system, if you will, totally funded by the city when it should it needs to be developer-driven work. So we're going to request that we also, that you guys are on board to approve an amendment to Hazen's contract for looking at the sanitary sewer system in that area. I included, and I'm gonna let the chief chime in and discuss his concerns with fire flow, but I also included in the memo a discussion about the Edgemont Reservoir and where we were with that, and how it can potentially, or how it could and likely will impact Zone 5 as we move forward with that work, as well as the base zone. So I'm going to turn it over to the chief to discuss fire.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So we went on the written record when county planning and zoning asked for comments on this PUD. In addition, the Funkstown Volunteer Fire Company, whose area this lies within in the county, went on the written record as well. I know from my previous service there, dating back to the mid-'80s, that they've been documenting and writing concerns about fire flow and firefighting water availability in Zone 5. And for whatever reason or reasons, this has been allowed to incrementally develop over decades, where we now have a list of significant fires in Zone 5, where the fire departments, even after adding water on wheels, tankers, tanker task force, all that, it's just not enough soon enough. So the fire department's clear recommendation is, and I'm speaking for Funkstown this evening as well, don't allow any more development until the water system infrastructure is improved there, however that occurs. And I understand that, you know, it's a city water system and a predominantly county development, and I'm well aware of the political concerns there, but there is just inadequate fire protection water to serve what we already have there, much less anything else we plan to put there. Compounded primarily by the fact that even though many of the properties are sprinklered with residential sprinklers, the attic areas and the fires that originate, like several have, from either a lightning strike outside of the sprinklered areas into the attic space. You may remember the Woodbridge fire, Doey's house while it was under construction, Kelly's Lane. There's been a number of large impact fires there that it'd be a struggle for any fire department, but if we don't have water, we don't have much of a chance to help our citizens there. So I'd be certainly willing to entertain any questions.
I think that the two issues that struck me the most on this subject, both the proposed increase in total number for the development and the Edgemont update, was first, and you can go back through, you know, the history of news articles as it relates to development in the Robinwood corridor, which 99% of it happens outside of the corporate limits of the city of Hagerstown, but on the city of Hagerstown's utility systems. You have county planning staff as part of that planning commission deliberation, county planning commission deliberation, saying water and sewer in this area are adequate. And it just strikes me as odd, and it really struck me as even more odd in this specific case, where I don't know that that's a statement the county planning staff is making because they've consulted with the city of Hagerstown's utility entity and been given that confirmation, or whether they just make that assumption because water and sewer lines happen to be out there in the vicinity, and therefore the assumption is there happens to be water and sewer simply available. And it just isn't that way. I mean, just because the lines are in the ground doesn't mean that the water capacity's there, or that the sewer line system has the functional capacity to handle the additional flow. And so there has to be, and there hasn't been, and I don't care whether you take the Robinwood corridor or, you know, out to State Line or down Sharpsburg Pike, out in the Hopewell Valley area. In any one of these instances, there has to be a more deliberate process by which the county planning department gets an actual confirmation from the city of Hagerstown as the owner of the utility saying, yes, capacity, and you quantify it very well in this memo by saying not just volume, you know, but system capability is there to accommodate that additional development. And I just feel like in every one of these instances, in every new development, it's just an assumption. It's an automatic assumption that yeah, the city of Hagerstown's water is in the vicinity and, you know, it'll be there, and yeah, the city of Hagerstown's sewer system is in the vicinity, and it'll accept it. And it just can't work that way. And so I think that it's good that both of these are being looked at. And so I think, you know, when I think about how that has occurred, and you know, anybody that's lived in the community for 2 or more decades can remember the only thing out Robinwood Corridor at one time was HCC, and then everything sort of happened, you know, out toward it. Without any real thought to that process, you know, I don't care whether it's water and sewer or the road infrastructure, you know, it just hasn't been given its due consideration as development has been allowed to occur. But, you know, we're now 6 years into trying to figure out what MD wants us to do with Edgemont. And it's like it's an imminent danger of you know, overflowing and damaging downstream water quality, but it's taking them 6 years to tell us what they want us to do to make sure that doesn't happen. I don't know how it's in such imminent danger of failure, but it's now 6 years into just saying, yeah, here's a solution to fix it. And for me, when that figure went from 8 million to 12, 16, and now I see in here 20, and then I think about, you know, here's development that's gonna double in size, that's going to become customers of that base, that's going to diminish the adequacy of that supply, you know, in that vicinity, which the taxpayers of the city will be on the full faith and credit obligation of borrowing against, not the people that live outside of the city, but the people that live in the city. They're the only ones on the hook for that credit once we take on that debt. You know, it can't be a silent, assumptive process. And I don't think that what you've recommended is out of hand in saying, look, you know, we need to slow down in Zone 5 before Zone 5, frankly, has, and I've said it before, has a completed part of that triangle. You know, we have adequate supply in the west end because we got 2 big buckets there, right, that are providing water at a certain level of pressure. And we got adequate supply from the south coming up from the Potomac because we have system capacity to pump it in and send it up. We do not have the system capability in the third portion of that triangle, which is coming from the Smithsburg into the Robinwood and back into the city area. And we need that system capability to complete that trifecta before we say, you know what, another 1,500 homes is good out in this area, and you know, Shore County, let's roll the dice and you know, see if we can treat it when something bad happens. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and,
Is there a pump, is there a water tower plan for Zone 5?
yes, the water tower.
I mean, I knew we talked about this 10, 15 years ago.
Yes, the water tower, there is, based on the conversations that have occurred thus far, yes, there's a water tower planned. But the water tower is only one piece to the puzzle because you've got to be able to get the water there at the rate it needs to get there in the event of a catastrophic fire. So that's, the tank is one piece of the puzzle. Pump Station 6 will be a big piece of that puzzle. The Chewsville PRV will be a big piece of that puzzle, as will, I'm gonna call it the Edgemont Brickner source. You know, just looking at Pump Station 6 and the tank back in 2008, not corrected for inflation, that was $7.5 million. And that was a piping project and piping, some pumping, and that's about it, you know. So, but it was a lot. It was still a $7.5 for Zone 5 back, when this was first being talked about. So this is major work that needs to be done. That doesn't take Edgemont into consideration. We think what's going to happen with Edgemont as far as the PMP is we believe the state's going to allow us to do a site-specific PMP study, which will incorporate the 3 models, but will be specific to just the Edgemont watershed. We think that's what they're going to allow. We don't have confirmation on that. We think that's going to cost in the vicinity of about $100,000, give or take, to do a site-specific study. I did want to mention, because, in the last 2 years, I've brought Elmwood before the mayor and council, and we discussed the piping and the looping and the improvements to the water system, and this body said, yes, that needs to happen, and we've held tight to that improvement to the system. We brought the Breeze Hill, I think it was Breeze Hill project out at the airport, and which required, we said we need looping out there because we have fire flow issues in Zone 3 and 3A. This body supported that. Black Rock, I'm fully confident that this body's going to support the recommendations, and we'll be bringing Mac Tank next month. And part of what we're doing with Mac Tank is the same thing. What was done in the late 50s, early 60s isn't consistent with what we need today. So we're going to request as part of the design to replace the Mac Tank that we also look at the bigger picture. What needs to be done? We know we need a 2-pipe system. We might need a 3-pipe system to meet some of the fire flow, a dedicated fire flow pump, and a 3rd pipe to meet some of the fire flow needs that we can't, or demands that we can't currently meet. But we're going to be coming back to the mayor and council to talk about the Mac Tank and what needs to be done there. We had a meeting yesterday regarding Haven Road, and the message that I conveyed is the message that the chief and I conveyed this evening. We have to look at the water system holistically. We have to meet average day, peak day, and fire flow. 4-inch pipes, 6-inch pipes, are not going to be permitted. You might be 8-inch, you might be 12-inch, depending on whatever that need is. So I can tell you in the last 2 years, we've been kind of stepping back and saying, let's run the hydraulic model, let's see what's needed to meet the new fire flow demands, because 1,500 gallons per minute at 20 PSI on a 6-inch pipe is not going to supply the fire department what they need.
You're not adequately pulling off a hydrant of a pipe less than 8 inches. You're just not.
So, while we have some history, some past, my goal moving forward is to look at it, I'm going to say comprehensively, and require that those, I'm going to say simple things. It's not a huge difference to put an 8-inch pipe. The cost for excavation, the cost for bedding and all is essentially the same. The only difference in cost is the price of the pipe, which is negligible in the big scheme of things. So, moving forward, that's the intent to look at the water system as well as the wastewater system comprehensively to make sure. The other thing that I think we've talked about, and I think we need to continue to talk about and keep kind of on the forefront, is how much capacity do we want to retain for the city versus how much capacity are we going to allocate to these different projects outside of municipal limits that may not be that we may not be able to annex now or even in the near future. So I think we need to keep that in mind too. What do we want to reserve for the city, for development inside the city, whether it be commercial, industrial, residential, because right now it's about a 60-40 split as far as water, outside, how much water we sell outside versus how much water we produce and sell inside city limits. So I always think that's, should be part of the conversation too. There should be some sort of acknowledgement to that, to say, okay, how much capacity do we have left? And how much are we going to allocate in this project? And where does that leave us from a development standpoint, or from a, future development standpoint?
But I think that in these communications, either to the developer or to the county, when I read your memo, I would only say that we should be cautious in using words like appears and possibly, things like that. Because even in this memo, there is suggestion that some things appear may work. And I just think that we need to be more deliberate in saying, hey, here's what we need, or you don't develop. This is what you've got to put in. This is what the system requires. And because I think that allows that wiggle room for the developer to say, okay, well, I'll go this route because it's a less expensive, less invasive, less time-consuming route.
I will tell you, I was asked how much money the water department was going to put forward for this new tank. And my response was, none. We already built this tank on the west side.
Right.
When the developer would not participate, the second west end tank, which was originally supposed to be on the east end.
Right.
We've already built that tank. I've already spent that money. So that was my message, is we made that investment. It's your turn to make the investment that you failed to make way back when, in 2006, 2007, 2008 even.
If they can't factor in $9.3 million instead of 7.5, 9.3 into 1,148 units, and shame on them. Okay.
So,
Not that I'm not saying that there probably could be some ARP help. I mean, that would definitely fit
There
into
could be
the guidelines.
infrastructure, through the infrastructure bill, there's gonna be help out there.
Then again, the county has that too, so.
They
Right, I
sure
mean,
do.
That's right.
I'm real hesitant to say, you know what, we're gonna exhaust those funds for Zone 5, which
Right.
isn't anywhere near the taxable
I
jurisdictional
got you.
limits of the
Correct.
city.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, yeah.
For the benefit of development that
Different funds.
we're now
We
at,
get no benefit from.
60% of completion of what should have already had that type of infrastructure in place.
Sounds like a county problem.
That might be an avenue
Yeah.
to tap into when it comes to the Edgemont Reservoir.
With the
and
infrastructure bill.
the Brickner plant, because we're looking at another probably 5 to 8 million
County
for the
should help with
Brickner
that, too.
plant.
I don't think that, we should eat $20 million worth of cost in our rate structure over a period of 30 years of financing for folks that are already on the system, paying into the system, and are a product of the system. For improvements, for new development, seeking the benefits of that system that doesn't have the ability to provide for it without those improvements.
And I'm gonna just throw this out there, and I don't know if it's a possibility, but, Smithsburg is moving forward with the development, and they're already at capacity. They're going to have to come back to this group and say, we need more capacity from Hagerstown. So, my thought process is that if we're moving forward with all of that, which that's the clear direction that staff has been provided, Smithsburg is also a beneficiary of the Edgemont Reservoir.
That
and the
wholesale
Brickner
rate's gotta
plant.
go up.
So,
And they'll make it back on the retail sales to their customers. No differently than when Funkstown upgraded its sewer plant, instead of hooking onto the city and passing that rate to its retail customers on its system.
so, there is that additional variable that, we will be looking at. So my ask this evening, just nod aheads, I'll bring it back in August, is to have Hazen and Sawyer look at both the water and the sewer systems associated with Zone 5, and, look at them hydraulically to make sure the capacity, what capacity exists, what capacity is needed. And also that we don't exhaust 100% of the capacity in that system,
Right.
in those systems as well. So that, that's my ask this evening, nod aheads for that, to bring it back next month for approval.
It also includes Zone 1 in that, also as the feeder to Zone 5 in that
Yes.
analysis?
Yes, it'll include Zone 1, Zone 4, and Zone 5 for the water hydraulic side, and then looking at Pump Station 19 gravity and force mains for the sewer side.
Sounds good. Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, we have the Dolman Black Heritage Museum request to increase grant funding.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You're ahead of schedule. I couldn't
I
figure out
know.
what was going on with the agenda.
You know where we were?
I had to ask Jill.
So far.
Yep. Okay. Every year, the city applies for funding from the Department of Housing and Community Development at the state for urban improvement projects downtown, as well as city economic development incentive programs. On June 8th, we presented a plan to the mayor and council to apply for funding for 3 city incentive programs and 1 urban improvement project, which is the Dolman Black Heritage Museum project for 465 Pennsylvania Avenue. On June 22nd, mayor and council approved the resolutions for the community legacy and strategic demolition fund grant applications. And then staff began working on the grant, or all along, we've been working on it, hoping that you would go along with what you agreed to on the 8th, because, the deadline was July 8th. So in reviewing the Dolman Black Heritage Grant application with the museum rep, we learned on June 22nd that the museum wanted to request more than staff had proposed on June 8th. While we had reviewed the concept on June 2nd with the museum rep, we didn't talk about a dollar amount, which is my mistake. And so when we drafted up the update to last year's application for Dolman Black Heritage Museum, we put in for $250, as we suggested at the mayor and council meeting on June 8th. But we learned on June 22nd that the museum instead would like to request, as this grant pass-through amount, for it to be $547,097 to allow more site work than staff had anticipated. So because of the way the schedule is this summer, there were no more meetings between June 22nd and now, which is after the June 8th deadline, so we didn't have a chance to come forward to get authorization from the mayor and council to make that change. And so we thought, well, we're stuck. Well, lucky for us, the portal crashed on July 8th, and they extended the deadline to July 13th,
works in
today.
mysterious ways.
That's right. And so since they were extending it till today, the day of a mayor and council meeting, we said, well, if the mayor and council would agree to this change as requested by the museum, would you allow us to send in the modification? And they have indicated to us that they would, by email, we can send the modification if the mayor and council agree to this change. And so if you do agree to this change, not only are they willing to accept it, but we would have to modify that resolution for the Strategic Demolition Fund to change the dollar amount, and so that could happen on July 27th. We've sent those after the fact many times in the past, because usually they give us very short notice about the deadlines, and with our council only doing regular session at the end of the month, we don't have as much flexibility as I guess some other places do. So the request is to increase the funding request, which would be a pass-through grant, if awarded, from the state to the Dolman Black Heritage Museum from $250 to $547,097. Again, still for pre-construction work at the site. Flexible funding from the SDF fund.
You guys good with that?
Fine. Yep.
Okay?
All right.
All
Thank
right, then
you.
we'll get that to the state, and we'll work on the resolution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we have the impact of the 2021 state legislation passed on police reform and its impact on HPD. Chief and Captain.
Good evening. I'm going to give you guys copies of the PowerPoint. I'm glad you guys are running a little early. I got about 150 slides to go through. We'll be here for about an hour or so.
It's along with the document, not being the presentation.
Oh, he takes the second part, so you're good, so.
Runs 300.
No doubt.
So, I was to be here when we had Senator Corderman and Delegate Sham here. Unfortunately, I was unable to make it that time to be part of that, so Scott asked me to come back down and kind of update everybody where we are. So, where we are here is I put together just some information that came from the Maryland Chiefs and Sheriffs Association that they compiled that made it a little easier. They did have a lot more slides than I did, so I did pare it down for purposes of brevity. But just to clarify, this information is being provided as an overview, and it may not be all inclusive, so we'll just kind of roll through here. I'll start with House Bill 1248. This is a use of force settlement reporting section. There's no impact on us. This basically says that we have to report to the governor's office any settlements that are made as a part of the city government for any use of force issues that our guys would be involved in. Every year we just have to report what that is, what those findings are. So we don't have that per se in our history, so it's not something that's an impact for us. And it goes through exactly what would be required for that settlement, as you can see in your slides there. I don't need to go through every single one of those. House Bill 445 takes effect in October, and that covers criminal procedures and charging procedures. I will say that it is a little redundant to what's already in the laws, that's already on the books. We take and supply charges on criminal citations as part of the Justice Reinvestment Act that occurred years ago. So a lot of what you see here is just repeat information from current laws that are out there. Where it talks about charging on drug charges, the way that works for us in real life is that we gather what we suspect to be drugs, illegal drugs, and we have it tested before we charge. So we go back and charge on those drugs later. So if it's a possession charge on even non-marijuana issues, usually it's a summons that gets issued to the person and not an arrest warrant. So usually the warrants are designed strictly for distribution, high-level stuff. It's not on the possession stuff, even on non-marijuana charges. So we do that because that's what the law requires us to do currently. This just reinforces that. Now there's a training commission has to develop statewide training on this. We'll wait that to come from them, and we'll handle that as in-service training the way we always do. So again, no real impact on this one. House Bill 445. Senate Bill 600 takes effect in October as well. The first thing on that is military surplus. We do not take advantage of military surplus, so that's not something that has an impact on us. And they also
Can't get weaponized aircraft.
we could, if you want me to get a license to fly it, I'd be more than happy to do that. But yeah. So they have in this bill an independent investigative unit that will look at investigating the citizen deaths that involve police. We actually welcome the participation with that. That will help us. We know that that's probably going to look like it's going to be a collaborative effort. We know the players in our own community that they don't know, so they'll come in, they'll take the lead, we'll assist, and that information will go, and you'll see where that goes from here anyway. So again, some rules on the independent investigative unit, nothing that has any impact on us or any concerns that we have as regards to what we're doing here. Senate Bill 71 takes effect in July of next year. That has to do with a couple things. So the use of force settlement reporting is part of that as well, it's linked in to the House bill. But we have, each officer has to sign this affirmative written sanctity of life pledge. I don't know what that is yet until the state gives us that. That is not an issue for us to sign. To be clear, we kind of cover that already. We do that in our oath of office. It's in the forward of our rules and regulations that covers this issue, and the code of ethics covers this issue as well. So it's something that we've already adopt and run off of. This is just going to formalize that in a more specific way for the officers to sign. Again, have no real issues with that at all. The other change is the definition of use of force, that it takes it from objective reasonableness, that the Supreme Court has identified, to necessary and proportional. And I think I've mentioned this before. Necessary and proportional has not been defined by the state or by the judiciary yet, so no one knows exactly what that means. That'll be challenged to sometime in some case somewhere down the road in the state of Maryland. I see necessary and proportional as what we do with use of force. It doesn't change our policies that we have. It's not gonna change. We'll have to change the language of that from objective reasonableness, but it won't change how we do our policies. What we do with use of force that we do is right in line with what they have here as well. Everything else on that aspect of the use of force is in our current policy and has been in our policy. So nothing we need to change there. There is some new training that we have to do that's on where it's undergoing training where a police officer may or may not draw a firearm or point a firearm at a person. We don't have specific training that specifies that specific thing, but because it's in the law, we will adopt that training and build in. We do training that teaches officers how to de-escalate, where they need to go with their use of force, and with that comes the drawing of your weapon and pointing your weapon. So we do train on this, just not into a specific fashion of when you should, when you can, when you can't. That's really it.
So are the people downstate sitting in those big rooms, are they gonna determine when you can draw your weapon and when you can't?
Well, this is gonna come from some help from the Training Commission, which is members of our profession that help us to identify through the legislative function that they have to identify where this intent is meant to be. Again, the use of force, if I'm pointing my weapon and in a situation where there's an alternative for me doing that, I may put myself in a bad position that I now have to use that weapon. So I think that's what they're alluding to. We train on that. So we train on the de-escalation to move up and down the continuum that we follow for use of force. We don't see that. We don't see that our guys are pulling their weapon. This isn't TV. On TV, cops pull their guns all the time. The reality is, our weapons don't come out of our holster hardly at all. It just doesn't happen. When we're clearing a building where there's an open door and we don't know if someone's inside, yes, our weapons are out. We don't know what we're coming up on. Those are tactics that we're gonna use and we're gonna continue to use. That's for the safety of our officers to do those things. If we're stopping a car that has someone inside that we believe and probable cause believe there's some violence has happened with weapons, we're gonna have our weapons out because we need to make sure that that's a safe environment to do. But on just a regular traffic stop or just regular encounters, we're not pulling our weapons out and pointing them at people. That just doesn't happen. So we train on this, just not this specific, is what I'm trying to say. And so I'm very confident this is not an issue for us to adopt this, to go into that. And then the last thing on that line, that a police officer who violates the use of force standard can be convicted of a misdemeanor and get 10 years. The law actually says that they have to intentionally violate the policy. So that changes the dynamics, excuse me, of what that means. Violating a policy, use of force policy, can happen when you're brand new. You don't understand that the level of force you're using a taser when you shouldn't use a taser. You haven't reached that level. Doesn't mean you're gonna get charged with a crime. It means you have to intentionally do that on purpose. You have to intentionally want to use that force. And you're not just making a mistake. So it's problematic. I'm not gonna say it's not. But the reality is, as you see, we move through this with the rest of the legislation, I think there's some balance here that'll help not allow it to be misconstrued, that people are being charged because they made a mistake. So, next part of 71 is body-worn cameras. We are already on board with this. We have been for many years, and we are already in this. You said on the committee for body-worn cameras, you're already aware that we are already well within our rights here on this. So, next part is early intervention. So we established this, I actually established this 2 years ago after I took over. I formed a team of instructors, our instructors to teach all levels of use of force, whether it's firearms, taser, pepper spray, those things. And we brought we brought them together to look at evaluating all use of force incidents from their perspective, from a training perspective, to see if we're missing something. But the process that we have in place has already been in place. Any use of force that happens goes through supervisor, to internal affairs, to each captain, to myself as a review. Every single one of those cases gets reviewed every single time. And then we evaluate that over the course of the year as well. So quarterly, the internal affairs sergeant will evaluate quarterly what those look like, to see if there's a trend happening that we're missing, that maybe from different individuals. That's always been in place. But this new use of force team that I put together is evaluating it from a standpoint of training. So back to what we talked about with drawing your weapon, are we seeing things happening that's some bad practices that men and women might be doing that we can correct? So it's an early intervention to address those issues. So we've already started to do this long before this law came into effect here. But the evaluation of those excessive force issues has been part of our policy and procedure as long as I've been here. Employee assistance programs, we already have that, and have had that and used that, and we use it as often as we can. We allow, or we mandate our staff that are on traumatic incidents to seek out help. If it's something extremely traumatic, we mandate them to go speak to a psychiatrist at least once. That's something we started years ago, and I've taken it very seriously since we've lost some members and former members of our staff to suicide, so we take that very seriously. House Bill 670 takes effect next year in July as well. The first thing on that is the officer scholarship program. This is a good thing. We used to have that here in the city where we got some education reimbursement, and then with funding issues and budgetary issues that went away years ago. This brings that back to allow our men and women to be better educated, to work on getting their opportunity to better their careers through the education process. So that's a good part of the bill. And then under the hiring and certification process, excuse me, they are mandating that we develop training for implicit bias. Well, when the previous chief was here, we sent about 12 of us to fair and impartial policing training, multi-day training. So those of us that went to that are certified in instructing implicit bias, and we train that with our men and women and have over the course of the years. This is actually part of a CLIA standard for our accreditation, that yearly we do implicit bias training with our staff. So brand new hires go through it at the academy level, and every officer on the staff goes through it. We actually mandated it for all of our civilian personnel as well. So every year they have to do implicit bias training as well. Anybody that deals with the public gets the training. So this is gonna be a little different. This will be mandated or developed by the training commission. So we'll just adopt what they come up with as part of our yearly and new entry level training. But we already do this. So again, nothing that's gonna change what we're doing here. So the three bottom items on this is the mental health screening. We do that at hiring, as mandated. We have to have a mental health screening that we do for any new hires coming on board. They have to pass a psychological exam. What we don't do currently is for every officer to have it done every 2 years. That's where there's gonna be an impact, or could be an impact. First of all, there's not a whole lot of psychiatrists and psychologists out there to be able to cover every police officer in the state of Maryland. So I don't know quite how this is gonna work. Secondly, that's gonna be costly. We pay a pretty good sum for our new hires to go through a psychological exam. And then the time away to send the officers to go do that every 2 years. So not sure what that's gonna look like. That could be something that could be a pretty good impact on us here. But that's at state level, trying to figure out how that's gonna look. I know the captain has thought about it, and it may just be that it's a written exam that comes to us that gets sent off to somebody. They just evaluate it and say, everything looks good. We don't know. We don't know what that looks like. The physical agility assessment, anybody hired after November 29, 2006, under our policy and under the contract is mandated to have a physical agility assessment every year. So almost the majority of my police department has this done already. Those of us that were hired before that don't have to do that. But any member that is on a special team, like SWAT team or the K-9 unit, that was hired before that, they have an agility test they have to go through as well. So it's a very minimal amount of people on our staff that would be impacted by having to go through this. Again, we don't know what that looks like. We'll wait on the training commission to come back to tell us what that means. But we have two different assessments that we use for our staff right now, and it's related to the work that we do. Lastly, on this slide, marijuana is not a disqualifying factor for certification as a police officer. That's kind of already true now. So marijuana was pulled out of the amount of times you could use marijuana in your lifetime that would disqualify you from being certified was removed during the Justice Reinvestment Act. Now, currently, as long as you haven't used marijuana within 3 years of applying to come to work for us, marijuana is not, you could use it 5,000 times before that and it wouldn't disqualify you. This doesn't say when that disqualifier is. Does it mean, we don't know if it means that you could have medical marijuana and be a police officer. It doesn't mean that you could have smoked marijuana before you come in and have your interview. We don't know what that means yet, so we're waiting on some ideas of what that actually means. But to be fair, marijuana is not keeping people out of being police officers as long as you're not using, because it's still illegal. Federally, it's still mandated as an illegal substance. It's just not in the COMAR regulations now. It doesn't fall in as all the other drugs do. It's declared as a narcotic in that part of the law. The remainder part of the hiring and certification process here, about revocation of certification, that's already current. That's been pulled from current law and just been repurposed into this law. So none of that changes. Anybody that commits any of these things that you see on this slide would be fired, and they wouldn't be certified as an officer in Maryland, at least with my police department. And then this part we already do as part of our process as well. Everybody that comes on to our department can be found to be perjuring themselves if they don't let us know where they used to work or where they were at, or any issues of discipline where they used to be at a police department. Part of what we do as background is very in-depth and intense. We're very strict, and when we've had officers that have applied with us but didn't come to us have told us that we are one of the toughest places to come to work for because our background process is so stringent. We take it very seriously. So these are things we look into. If we know that you worked at Prince George's County Police Department, we are seeking Prince George's County Police Department to give us the records. You gotta sign a waiver to let us get to those records. If you don't move forward in our process. So this doesn't impact us, and I don't want anybody on our police department that would have these issues anyway. So that's where that is. Under the whistleblower protections, we already have this. It's part of the current LIBOR law is this law. They just adopted that part over into House Bill 670. We also have this covered under our HR policy 420 covers whistleblower protection. So we're already in line with that as well. Citizen recording, people videotaping us, that has been part of what we have been mandated to accept for a long time, since cell phones have been around. This has been out, so this is nothing new for us as well. It just got adopted into this law. And it's part of our policy that we have. Traffic stops. Again, nothing here changes for us. This is all practice and in policy that we have under Chapter 17 of our policy. The only change that we have here that we have to add to our policy is the punishment that could be administered for failing to notify or provide information. That just doesn't currently say that in our policy. So that'll be an adopted change to our policy, and we'll be there on that. Accountability Board, this falls on the county to put this together. As you can see here, they'll hold quarterly meetings. They have to appoint a civilian member to charging committees and trial boards, receive complaints on police misconduct, that they will forward it to us to investigate. They won't do the investigation, but they can accept complaints and then give us those complaints to do, and then do quarterly reports to the governor's office to identify those issues. I don't have any issues with what I see on the accountability board. It's basically it's an oversight of what we're doing, and I'm not afraid of what we're doing. I'm not afraid of how we handle our misconduct issues when we do have those. We'll probably be tougher on what we think should happen to the guys than what we think that will come from these accountability boards and charging committees. But as you can see, these are the rules that come out of that, but the board has to be put together by the county government. They hold that key. With that comes the administrative charging committee. What this basically says is that we'll do an investigation on an officer for some kind of misconduct or complaint. Once we're done our investigation, we will submit that to the charging committee. They will then be secondary to say, we agree or we disagree that they shouldn't be charged. We think they should be charged with a crime, and they have the right to mandate that charge at that point. Again, I think that that's not gonna be an issue. We know when we should charge an officer with something. It'll be just an oversight with that to come up with, but, again, nothing, it just adds a step for us in terms of what we're doing. They can make determinations, they can actually, ask for some information and do a little bit of oversight and looking at the camera footage to see if they agree, that kind of stuff, but they don't do the investigation, they can look into our investigation a little further. The next thing on House Bill 670 is a disciplinary matrix. We've been asking for something like this for a long time. I can tell you that we use something similar already. We don't have a matrix, so to say, in our department, but if we have an unusual sustained charge on an officer for something that we just don't see much around here, we actually reach out to other agencies within Maryland to see if they've had someone that they've had have the same charge happen to them or something similar, and how did they handle the discipline part, so that we're in line with what other agencies are doing with discipline, and we're not just making it up on the fly. It doesn't happen that often, but it happens on occasion where we just double check to make sure we're not too heavy-handed, we're not too lenient. We want to make sure we're in line. So this will just give us a roadmap on how, if you do this, this is the discipline you can get. Much like you see in court systems with charges. You know, there's a range. You can get from here to here for committing this kind of crime. It's a very similar kind of format, so we're completely okay with this. Trial board, this is basically adopted a lot of the LIBOR language from the LIBOR law over to this. So everything you see in the first part of this slide is old, or is new. It narrows the LIBOR rules down. So in the old, under LIBOR currently, I pick who the trial board members are, with the exception of one, which is a rank of the officer that is being in the hearing. I select either from another agency or from within my own agency the other members that sit on that trial board. There's also some negotiation that can happen from unions on what the trial board might look like, who would sit on it under current law. This takes it from those options, and it says that it has to be a retired or active judge, and it has to be a civilian, and it has to be a member of equal rank of the officer. It's 3 people. To me, that's not something that worries me. That's completely fine with what we're looking at. Current LIBOR law still allowed for a non-voting member of the public to sit on a trial board. This allows a voting member to sit on a trial board, a civilian vote. The last line of that is old LIBOR language, carries over, where they have to be trained before they can sit on a trial board. The next slide here talks about the trial board shall be open to the public with exceptions. That's new. It also allows for the complainant to be part of the trial board. That's somewhat new, although we've had, our last trial board that we had was pushing 20 years ago. So that's the experience we have with trial boards. They just don't happen very often here with us. As for the complainant has the right to be notified trial board, that would have happened under current LIBOR process. The burden of proof falls on the department. That's current. And discipline only for cause. Again, that's current law. Nothing changes there. Within 30 days of the date of issuance, the decision may be appealed by the employee. Again, current LIBOR law, and it can be appealed to the circuit court here in Washington County. That's all carryover law from LIBOR. So it just narrowed down what that trial board looks like in that part of it. House Bill 670 also asks for victim rights advocate. What it says here is that it's someone to walk the complainant through the process, much like we do with the court, and we have victim rights people who work for the state's attorney's office. They want the same thing here for this process. Our current process has the Internal Affairs Division sergeant does that. I don't know that that would still fly under the law because it doesn't really give us clear direction, so we'll be seeking out what that means. If it does not, then we have to figure out who that person would be within our agency, or we may have to hire someone. Could be a cost that goes with that. So until we get some more clarification on what that looks like, we'll have to figure out what that person is.
Do you feel like those specific new additions will create an increase in the legal profession to utilize that as an avenue to develop supportive, I guess, evidence for the position of their representative complainant in the actual legal process? Does that make sense?
So you're saying anything found in the trial board would be used then for any?
Well, like a lawyer make a complaint and may say, hey, this issue happened. And typically what would happen is, you would have your basic legal process that exists now. And a lawyer may say, hey, here's an avenue that you can go, we can build some information, in this setting that may then bolster our defense capability should we then go to the actual step of legal process. And then the lawyer basically makes out twice. And I can just see that within the legal field to say, here's.
Yes, there's a possibility.
Because then I can see an increased cost to local jurisdictions who are now basically going through a judicial process twice almost.
Yeah, the easy answer is that's very much a possibility. That there are attorneys and people out there that might try to take advantage of that. There are some protections in there. Information from a hearing board is confidential during the hearing and trial. You're going to see where I get to another part of this that's problematic, that I have a problem that may lead to what you're talking about. But when it comes back to that trial board, getting a retired judge or a current judge to sit on that trial, we don't know if they're going to want to get paid to be on that trial board. I can't make a judge do it. I can't make a retired judge come in and do it. But it's required by law that someone has to do it. So it may be that we may have to wind up paying someone to come in and sit on a trial board. And judges aren't cheap.
Yeah.
There are some things that could be here. Again, our last trial board was 20 years ago. So is that impact significant? I don't know. But with the changes in these laws, and people take advantage of those things in ways that we haven't thought about yet to get advantage, that they think is an advantage maybe on their end, that then we have to address and deal with. But the answer is it's very possible that could happen, yes. So from the victim rights advocate side, we're gonna have to figure out if we need to bring someone specific for that, and then that could be a cost. The right to assistance, this is, an officer is subject to a complaint of misconduct, has the right to have representatives there. That's current law from Lee Board's carried over, and it's just the absolute right thing, that they have some legal right to have legal representation when they're under investigation with these things. The general rights of officers, as you see on this next slide, is again a current carryover from LIBOR. Everything that's here is exactly what is in the current law, which gives the officers have that right now. Those rights are currently in place. So nothing's changed there as well. Compelled testing, again, everything you see here is carryover from LIBOR. If you're under investigation for possible drug use or those kind of issues, I can compel you to take a test. If you refuse, you can be charged with insubordination, and punishment goes along with that. and then it carries into the investigation as to your use anyway. I'm using that as an example. Or failure to take a polygraph. If I mandate you to take a polygraph, it cannot be used in a criminal trial as used. If you volunteer to take a polygraph, then if you agree and I agree as the administrative side to use it, then it can be used in an administrative side, but it's never gonna get used in a criminal matter. They just don't get used in criminal cases. Emergency suspensions, again, LIBOR provides this. What is done here is it's opened up the definition of emergency suspension a little more broad than what LIBOR had. So it gives me more rights to suspend on an emergency stand than I have currently when this goes into effect. But the emergency suspension without pay can only be for 30 days. So whatever's being done, if it can't be resolved in 30 days, that person has to go back on the pay roll until you can resolve it with your investigation. So it's changed it a little bit. It's given me some more power to suspend where I didn't have that. I don't have that right now. House Bill 670 for terminating. This is not new. Anybody that commits a misdemeanor as performance of their duties, a secondary assault, misdemeanor, or involving dishonesty, fraud, theft, or misrepresentation are going to get fired. I think, Scott can attest to my tenure here. There's been people that I've terminated for these very same things in the last couple of years for doing dishonest things, and I have no problem with that. If you're doing those things, you shouldn't be employed as a police officer anyway. But it's not new. House Bill 670 misconduct database. This is something that we have to develop, and we are already developing this. We are looking at a software program called LEFTA that works on internal affairs kind of functions. It's about $7,000 a year, reoccurring cost. We're working with them to see if that system will develop what this requires, which is a database that will allow a complainant to put in their number to follow the status of the case along to see what's going on with their complaint, along with the advocate that would be assigned to them. So that would have a cost, and we'll be developing on that and having that ready to go by next year. Investigative records. Here's one of the biggest things I have, one of the biggest complaints and problems with, is this right here. Under current LIBOR law, if there is a record of an internal affairs investigation where that officer was found that complaint was unfounded, he or she was found not guilty of that, it was dismissed for some reason, a criminal matter happened, and it was acquitted, any of those kind of things happen, within 3 years, or after 3 years of that investigation, they could ask for that file to be expunged, and it comes off their record. Under this current law, if someone makes a complaint on a brand-new officer on day one that is completely fabricated and false, that will follow them the rest of their career in their file and never goes away. And the problem I have with this is that people who commit crimes today can have some of their records expunged for some of the things they've done. And I am okay with that. I am a proponent of that. I think that's a fair thing to do, not to completely carry that across the rest of their life. They carry that with them. But now, a member of my profession in Maryland gets accused of something. If it's found unfounded and it's untrue, that still carries. And what you're going to see is that the Public Information Act allows people to come in and get that information. And it'll be the defense attorneys, and it'll be attorneys that will use that record to use against the officers for integrity reasons or other reasons down the road for criminal cases. This one is one of the biggest things I have a huge problem with. This went too far. Way too far.
Why do you think they did that?
I think that in the emotion of last year, I think that legislators believe that this is hiding something when you allow records to get expunged. That they've forgotten that we are people like everybody else, that you can make a mistake and you could have, if it's sustained charge, it doesn't go away, it stays on your record. If that charge is found that you did it, it never goes away. That stays there. That's part of LIBOR right now. But the fact that you get accused of something, I think it's, in the legislator's mind, I think they believe that there's gotta be something there because you got accused. So therefore, we gotta make sure that that bad cop who had all these complaints made over the course of their 25-year career, there was something there and you just didn't do anything about it as an agency. And I think that's misguided, I think it's wrong, and I have a real sore spot for this one. This one bothers me really bad. And I've talked to Delegate Sham about this one, I've talked to Senator Corder about this. Now, hopefully, this next legislative session, they can go back and try to adopt some changes to this, but this one here is a real problem for me.
In the task force discussions I sat in on, the word you always heard was pattern. They were looking for patterns. Whether they were legitimate or not, they wanted to see if you had one particular officer that was in a situation where he had 10 charges on his record, founded or unfounded, that must mean there is still a pattern of behavior there.
And what I would say,
it was the most volatile discussion of the task force guy was on, yeah.
And what I would say is that, just looking at the city of Hagerstown, if I have an officer working, let's just say our downtown beat, we have 5 beats. 4 corners of our city and a downtown is another one. That downtown beat becomes a cover card generally for all the other beats. They go and help the other ones and show up on those calls. Probably one of the most busiest beats that we have. That officer has more opportunity to have complaints made against them purely because of where they work, the assignment they've been given, than anything else. And then on top of that, you may have some officers that are a little more aggressive than others, that may not have the best communication skills, but don't violate policy in what they're doing, that could have a complaint. You could have a member of our community that just doesn't like somebody and can continue to make those complaints. That will stay on that guy's record forever, and that's the pattern, even if there's nothing there. That video, body cam video, everything else could prove nothing's there, that never goes away. That part of this bill is horrible, and it's horrible for this profession, it's horrible for police in the state of Maryland. That one's bad.
So currently, right now, though, because you go back about, you talked about after 3 years, they could have something expunged. Let's just say Captain Dr. Alexander has a complaint against him, completely unfounded. That stays on his record for 3 years?
It's on his record for 3 years.
Yeah. Well, see, that's
Under current law.
That's not fair.
That's under current LIBOR law.
Yeah, well, that's still not.
But that is at least fair for me, because if you're looking for a pattern, if nothing else happens within 3 years, that's saying here, it's there. It also gives me, and really in our agency, it's probably not as big of a deal as a big agency like Baltimore City.
Right.
Where you've got 3,500 officers working, and you got people moving in positions like internal affairs a lot more often than we do, where he had a complaint made against him, and if I could be deleted right away, and then there's another one, and somebody else is coming in working behind you, they're not gonna remember those other, they won't have that memory because they didn't do the investigation. Here, I got a sergeant that's been in internal affairs for years, so I mean, he's gonna remember, even if he doesn't have it on document, he's gonna remember, there's something going on. This is like the 3rd complaint I've had on the captain, even if they're unfounded, there's gotta be something there. So having it for 3 years at least is a safety net that allows us to look at that. And I think that's why LIBOR had it in there in the first place, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that it was there to allow us to have at least some knowledge internally that that complaint came in, there's another complaint came in, and the 3rd complaint comes in, even if the 2 are unfounded, we can go, hey, maybe it's just how you're talking to people, or maybe there's something else we need to help train you with to get you to stop having complaints made against you. That part
Even though they were unfounded?
Even if they're unfounded. From a policy standpoint, there may be a reason why those complaints come in. Because again, we don't want people complaining. We don't want, and we've had officers that are brand new, that come in, that want to do the right, they're giving the exact same information. It's not what I'm saying, it's how I'm saying it. And people will complain. And you can see why they would complain, but there's no violation of policy. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's not that I'm saying the wrong thing, it's how I'm saying it. And people are complaining, which means we gotta do the work to investigate it. So we find ways to help that officer communicate better. Keep doing exactly what they're doing, but communicate better, complaints go away because they're not doing the wrong job, they're just saying it the wrong way. So, for a 3-year window, I'm okay with that. We've never had an issue with that. You know, and again, the officer has to request that to come off. They have to request it. So after 3 years, they can say, you know, I got something on my file, I'd like that to come off, comes through, I approve it, and Internal Affairs deletes that whole record from the file. And I think that's fair. I think that's fair because we do that for people who commit crimes, who are convicted of committing crimes.
Right.
They get benefit
Convicted.
of that, again, to better them after they get out, so it doesn't carry with them and hurt them the rest of their life, so they can get opportunity. This goes the opposite of that when it comes to this profession. This is the exact opposite of that, and I have a real problem with it. So,
I mean, if a scumbag goes out and commits a crime and goes to trial, gets found not guilty, doesn't stay on his record for 3 years.
no, but up until recently, it stayed on the case search where you could see that. Now it doesn't. Now it's not there to be held. And the reality of it is for a person who's convicted or not even convicted of a crime, that can't be used against them in trial. It can't be used against them anywhere. It can't be used against them for sentencing because they weren't convicted. But this isn't criminal. This is administrative. And the other part of this is that it's going to be used by defense attorneys to try to impeach our police officers in criminal cases to benefit their defendants or benefit them, and we have no way of getting away from that, because it's gonna make it look at that officer as a bad officer because he had 3 complaints over the last 4 years that were all unfounded. And that's not what's gonna be said when it goes to court. That's not what's gonna be said in trial. Now, I believe our judges will look past that and see if it's a bench trial, but if you're gonna have a jury trial, you're up in the air on that, and that could have an impact. It really could. But it's gonna have an impact morale-wise for our guys too. They're gonna feel like they're defeated, and why am I doing this if I'm gonna carry around something I didn't do the rest of my career, and get it used against me when I'm going to court.
We all know that police officer from 15 years ago or 20 years ago, that if he pulled you over and you happened to look in your side view mirror and see who it was, and you were like, damn, because you knew that you were gonna get treated a certain way, be it butt chewing or whatever, because this guy wasn't a bad police officer. He was just that guy that you didn't want to get pulled over by, you know.
And look, every
guys like that who are exceptional police officers.
every man and woman I have in my police department have their own little things. Some guys like traffic, they like to go out and they want to do DUI stops. That's their thing. That's what they're really good at. Some guys want to go out and they want to get guns off the street, or they want to get the drugs off the street. And they take that seriously because that is evil happening in our city. And you're right, there's going to be a different approach from them than somebody else. We look at policy. We look at, are they following the policy of what we teach them to do? Are they following their training? Are they outside that policy or not when they do those things? And if they're not outside the policy, I can't make you change your personality.
No, you can't.
I can't.
But this can.
Well, it may. It may change. It may not change their personality, but it may change what they go out and want to do.
Yeah.
So it's just it was a horrible
I'm sorry to be
addition
leading
to.
this.
It was a horrible. No, it was a horrible addition to this law, and it shouldn't be there. And I'm gonna hope that our representatives can try to get that adopted or amended this next session. Investigative action review, this is an oversight of the investigation. Again, upon this, we're gonna be providing this information to this, we'll take this immediate complaint from a member of the public for misconduct. We do that now. So if that complaint comes in, whether it's by a civilian, by a supervisor, it gets sent directly to Internal Affairs, and then it's decided who's gonna handle that investigation, whether it's back at the shift level, Internal Affairs is gonna handle, or it comes to me for some special assignment of who's gonna handle that. We also review, the administrative charging committee will review and make sure that within 30 days of that, it's been handled and taken care of. So again, it's an oversight, it's part of those other components, not anything that we're worried about here. Collective bargaining, it basically says that they cannot negate or alter any of the requirements of this through collective bargaining. That is a little bit different than what was in Lebor. Lebor had a couple little spots where they could, but that's been taken away. SWAT reporting, we already collect this data as part of our SWAT team. When I say we, the Sheriff's Department and ourselves, our team members on this, collect this data. To this point, we don't distribute this data to where they're asking it to go, where it has to go down to the governor's office every 6 months, provide this information. We're already collecting this data anyway, so this is not an issue for us. It's more of an administrative function. Used for complaint reporting, we collect this data already internally for our CLIA standards, and it's part of our CLIA report we do every year. So having this ready to send to the Training Commission is not going to be a problem for us. We already collect this data as it is now. Signage postage for how to file a complaint on a police officer or obtain records. We've already adopted that over a year ago. We have, it's on our website, and it's also in our lobby. The only thing we have to do is go back and add the second part, which is how to obtain the records. That wasn't part of the original posting that we put. So that'll be done and handled, and we'll have that adopted probably within the next month. We'll have that up and taken care of, so we'll be in compliance. Senate Bill 178 takes effect here in October. This covers search warrants. First part of the search warrants for no-knock warrants. We don't do no-knock warrants hardly at all anymore, and haven't for a long time. But when we do, we have the approval of all of our warrants go through, search warrants go through the state's attorney's office, and always have. It's never been a legal requirement. It's been a request and requirement by our local state's attorney for as long as I've been here. And so we've been well ahead of the game here in Washington County, where other counties didn't have to do this. You could go get a search warrant without running it past your prosecuting office and do it. We legally could have as well, but we never did. So adopting this is not much of a change for us. The new thing, no-knock warrants can only be served between 8 and 7 p.m. Again, that's along the line with really federal law. DEA follows those same guidelines. I think they're just adopting that into that. With exigent circumstances, we can get around that if we had to for safety purposes for our officers and things based on the circumstances. This makes us jump through some different things to require that we have to document and get approved by a judge to do a no-knock and to do it outside of the scope of those hours. Again, these are things, a lot of the other bullet points on these next two slides are already currently in our rules and regulations and policies, so that doesn't change. On the second slide, the acknowledgement that a police officer who would execute a search warrant have successfully completed the same training in breach and call-out entry procedures as SWAT team members is something that is kind of taught in the academy. We're going to adopt that and get that put into play, and we'll have that in place before October. And all of our guys will be trained up on that. They already know how to do it. We just got to show the training to prove that. Last line about using flashbangs, stun grenades, and things like that. That is only done by SRT members, not by any member outside that. We don't have access to those kind of devices. And the SWAT team goes through a protocol that determines when they're used, when they're not used. They have a matrix that they look at. There's a determination whether they're even going to be able to be used for that call out. When it comes to these things, they look at exigent circumstances and officer safety reasons before any of those things would happen. So again, not used that often. When they are, it's necessary and proportionate to when they have to use that. And then the reporting, just some minor changes to what we currently already gather and what the SWAT team already gathers, and it's just in relation to the no-knock warrants aspect that we'll have to make some changes there. And the same thing on the next slide with the discharging. We collect this data. Most of it's always zero. We're not usually killing domestic animals or injuring animals during our entries. And then lastly, under 178 is the Public Information Act. This is essentially the same as the Public Information Act we work under. The only change is the second line of the first slide, which is related to internal affairs investigative files. Up until this law takes effect, they are considered personnel files and not open to the public. Now they will be open to the public as if there are any other police.
It's probably the
file.
second most contentious thing, was this one, besides the,
This one's, again, problematic because attorneys are gonna come in, they're gonna try to use this information to discredit our officers because of some file that they find. And because we can't delete or expunge any of those things, they can get the accusations and all the way down through it. I disagree with this. I think that if you work for a company and internally your company's handling something as, dealing with you as a member of that, department or that agency or organization, that is not open to the public to see that. But apparently legislators feel differently, that our right to that, personnel issue is not as privileged as everyone else that works in private sector or elsewhere in the public sector. We are treated differently.
How will that apply to executive privilege of elected bodies who have discussions of personnel-related matters?
There are some parts of the Public Information Act in here that covers that it does provide that protection. So things that cannot be released have to do with those things you just talked about there. There's a lot of other ones in here. And again, I could go through them and read them off the slides here, but if you read through that, you'll see where those protections are built in. So that would be, that could be suppressed from that PIA request.
So under this change, under no circumstance, will the discussion of an elected body related to a personnel matter related to such an incident be allowable or required to be made available under this change? Is that a safe assumption? 'Cause if not,
I would
think that
strongly
brings into
suggest that,
question.
I would strongly suggest that legal looks at that from the perspective of this body and the discussions that this body has to see if that's part of this. I don't want to comment that it's not.
Yeah.
I think when I read through this, I think there might be some protections there, but it may, I believe it'll require legal to chime in on that.
Because, I mean, I think it will change the context in which elected members of bodies will want to have or be involved in and engaged in such discussion as it relates to personnel.
I mean-
Even though that's really the most primary thing that elected bodies go into executive session for discussion of.
I would have Jason and Jen,
Yeah.
personally, I would have them look into that, to see what that outcome would be. But those are the two big hot contentions for me. Lebor's been stripped down. A lot of the Lebor that's gotten stripped down is just time things, like when I can interview an officer. They had in there that they had to be reasonable to the officer when they work and things like that. It's removed that as a mandate. The reality is, we're still gonna treat people like people, and I'm not gonna bring you in the middle of the night when you work, days, just because I'm gonna try to, force you into an interrogation standpoint. Reasonableness and common sense plays a lot of effect here. Where it comes to the men and women of the profession is that those safety concerns or safety nets that were in Lebor protected them from potential bad commanders and leaders that could do those things if they felt necessary. I don't believe our profession is like that, and I don't believe that's a concern greatly, but I know it's not a concern here in this police department. I've never seen it for people that I work for. It's not how I act. I don't see that from anybody coming behind me, acting that way. So that's the down and dirty as best I can make it without really boring you guys.
it just shows how much there was.
I've spent 3 days on trying to just get this together in a way that I can present it in 20 minutes. And if I don't have to look at this PowerPoint slide again anytime soon.
Yeah.
So,
And there was a lot in discussions that I was a part of back in the legislative session, that it was just put it in, and if it gets challenged, we'll deal with it either at the challenge point or during the next legislative session. A lot of this was done to get it in, and there's a lot of good stuff in this. Actually, it's just we're fortunate that 90% of it we've already done as a department with the training and with the staff, and we don't have, knock on wood, some of the issues that I think a lot of these were geared towards, especially as it relates to the fact that we do CALIA certification. We're one of the very few in Maryland that do that, so.
With CALIA, that clearly drove us over the years
Yeah.
to be ahead of the game on these things. So
Yeah.
these changes don't dramatically impact us.
Right.
And again, from a disciplinary standpoint, like I said, it's been nearly 20 years since we had a trial board for someone that got in trouble.
Right.
And it was a serious charge. Just doesn't happen that often. And when people do things bad enough to get fired, they get fired. Plain and simple. I don't want people here that are gonna be that way. I don't. It's bad for the profession, it's bad for the men and women that work, have to work next to them. It's just not appropriate. You wouldn't want it in City Hall if they did that.
Right.
So why is it any different in law enforcement? So some things have changed. I've been through this with the Chiefs and Sheriff's Association, been on those calls and listening to the lobbyists from that. It could have been a lot worse. We are not the only state to have some bad legislation come out in this past year. But the reality is you have elected officials who are not police officers making decisions on how police should be, not knowing how the real world works. And I get it. Some of that's emotion, but I think what happened in some of this is that someone just didn't want to listen. They had their own implicit bias against us about what police really are when they created some of this legislation. And if we have to do implicit bias training and understanding, I strongly believe that people that get elected to office should have the same thing. Because we all have it. We all carry it with us. We all are gonna have it. Everyone in this room has it. If you don't understand it, it's that way. I mean, think about what you think about when you go to a doctor's office. How many people complain about, why do I have an appointment when my appointment never happens when I go to the doctor's office? Everyone thinks they could fix that. Let me run the doctor's office and that won't happen. People get in and out when they're supposed to. There's a reason why it happens in every doctor's office, because there's a reason why. Unless you work there, you don't really understand it. Those are the things that we talk about. I mean, it's a little bit, cavalier in comparison, but that's people that are not in a profession telling me how to do the job. People that are, me telling a doctor how to do surgery because I watched YouTube, again, being cavalier, but that's what happens. And I'm not demeaning legislators, but this is what happens with legislation. They adopt a problem that they may see at one agency or a problem they know specifically, and they want to fix it broadly, and when you do that, you create more problems. There's a butterfly effect.
And when this whole process,
There's a butterfly effect that happens.
when this whole process started, like Chief said, it was 3 times worse than what the final, and I think that was an education process that not only the legislators showed those of us that were civilians or those that were law enforcement that were part of these meetings, but I think it went the other way around, because there were several legislators, especially those from down in the city, that would come back around and say, oh yeah, we never thought of that. We understand, we never thought of that. So I think it was a good education process for everybody involved. I think the way these came out, though there are some that are definitely head scratchers on our end, I think this was a good start to reform. We're just fortunate that we are in a position here that we have found, we are in the minority for that have our act together predominantly and already doing a lot of these things. And for that, we can be extremely fortunate, especially when it came to body cameras. That could, unless there are some municipalities that get some serious assistance to be able to purchase body cameras and buy the storage and be able to do the retrieval software and all of that, are gonna be severely impacted. And I think they've got, 3 years to implement? And they're gonna be severely impacted, and we're set there, so.
I mean, think about, what people don't think about is, your police department and what size police department you have here. You know, but a lot of police departments are 2 or 3 man police departments, or they're 3,500 man police
Held to the
departments.
same standards.
And when you have agencies that are really big, there are gonna be problems. When you have agencies that are really small, there are gonna be problems, because you don't have the checks and balances built in. So an agency that, I'm fortunate, and he's fortunate, we worked at an agency the size that we are, because we're in that sweet spot. And I think if you look at agencies that are about our size around the country, you won't see issues like you see in big agencies or in really small agencies. And in really small agencies, it's the lack of training and the lack of oversight, the lack of being able to bounce things off of other people, because there's only 1 or 2 of you there. So you're gonna make mistakes because you learn the behavior bad, and you take that bad behavior and you run with it. There's nobody there to correct you. So LEBOR and those other things was that safety net to help with that. So I get it, but that broad brush approach has a butterfly effect. And when you don't think through what some of these things are gonna do, that's where the problem is. So hopefully, the nice thing about legislation is it can be changed. It can be adopted. So I'm hopeful that the next legislative session can change a couple of these things, at least amend them to get it to the point where it doesn't have the negative impact on the profession that it's having or will have. It could have been far worse. If it had been where it was going, you would not have police officers working in Maryland.
No.
That I can guarantee you. Guys would have walked away. You're gonna take away the protections that we're out there making split-second decisions on, and you're gonna hold me accountable to that when you get to sit back and look at it from every angle you can with time on your hands to say, you should have, and you weren't in that moment, making that decision right at that moment, in real time. And if you've never done that, if you've never been in that situation, you're never gonna understand it. And that's not a criticism, that's just reality.
Do you guys have any questions for the chief?
Thank you very much. Tommy, thanks for what you brought to the
Well, I had the
table.
answers for all the questions, but nobody had answers. That's what this is, actually.
That's just a sample of the policies and where we are, and to prove that what I said is that we're doing is right here.
Listen, I've been around this police department, well, I was born into it, luckily. But, it's always been a great department, and you guys have always been ahead of the curve and setting the standard for everybody else. So I expect nothing less in the future.
Look, we make mistakes, we're human beings. We have bad days and we do things we shouldn't do sometimes, and, that's gonna happen. It's always gonna happen, no matter how much you do, it's gonna happen. That shouldn't hurt you in your job. You should
In
get disciplined for those
perpetuity,
things.
right.
You should get disciplined for those things, and you learn from those things. And if you don't learn from those things, then you don't do the job anymore.
Right.
But it's scary for guys that are brand new in the job that don't know how this is gonna really impact them. We've been around for a long time. I can look at this and say, I know how this is gonna go because I know how our agency works. But a guy that's got 3 years on the job, 4 years on the, 5 years on the job with no real experience in that hasn't seen some of this stuff happen, now they're gonna be like, wait, what happens if I do this? So what are they gonna do?
And this
They're
is the
gonna-
last thing you want
freeze
an
and not
officer
do
to
it.
have is doubt in their mind when they
Can
show
do
up to a situation. You don't want them to have a doubt.
And and I've said this, I'll say it again, you have the best men and women that could do the job working at this police department. I sent you two an example of that just the other day,
Yeah.
with a shooting that occurred in town. And it was a team effort of everyday police officers doing their part that resolved that issue within hours.
Right.
And that doesn't happen everywhere, but it happens here because they take the job seriously. They may doubt certain things, but when the rubber's meeting the road, they are on it. And they are doing the job, and they're doing it well. And I cannot be more proud of the men and women that I work with. They are top-notch in what they do.
We appreciate what they do, and we appreciate what you guys do too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you,
That's
Dennis.
good. right. City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. Just real quick, I want to give you an update on the ARPA funding process. As you know, we've been meeting as a group since March. We have taken into account the community survey, the discussions you all had during your strategic planning sessions, as well as input from directors and staff as to projects that they would like to see this money go to. Right now, we have about 62 projects that are all separated into categories that are defined in the interim final rule, and expect that they'll stay when the final rule comes out here at the end of the week. You all have a copy of that. It's not yet ready. It's not yet finished. We had a meeting today. We'll add a couple to it today, and then we have directors meeting tomorrow and add a few more. We'll probably be up to about 70 potential projects. We will take that list and we will work on prioritizing what we feel are the main projects we can do successfully, do well, that are the most impact to the community, and we'll bring those to you for you to review, and then you'll also have the entire list, and you can mix and match or change according to how you all feel you want to do it. We'll also be meeting with the county in the next few weeks to go over with them our list and to combine, and not to combine lists, but to compare lists, see what we have on there that are more of a county initiative than a city, or see where we might be able to combine resources to make more of an impact in a particular area. We'll also bring those back to you. We're also very fortunate Congressman Trone and his office have a copy of this list. They were very appreciative and excited to see it, because not only do they want to help us identify ARPA funding, but they also want to help us take some of these projects and identify other funding sources through the CARES Act and through any COVID relief to help get as many of these projects through as we can. So that'll be part of the grant coordinator's function, to be the central point of contact for that office and to work with everyone to try to get that through. So I just want to let you know where we were at with that, and that come August, you're going to get a lot more information, a lot more specifics on where we're going with it. Obviously, we've already done the stipend out of the ARP money, the grant coordinators coming out of the ARP money, and we've had some initial discussions with the health department on behavioral health initiatives that we're fact-finding, and we'll wait to get information back from them. So that's the ARPA update. And if you have any questions, give me a holler on that. Friday night, movie in the park, Jurassic Park. The movie's in City Park, showing Jurassic Park. That'll start at 7 o'clock. Saturday concert.
He's had a couple weeks off.
Yeah.
He's off.
I got a ton of stuff, Councilman. And then Saturday, the concert series at City Park, the Cruisers. Everyone should be aware of the Cruisers locally, good local band. Then you should go see them if you've never seen them. At 6 o'clock. Huh?
It's a band.
It's a band, the Cruisers,
Okay.
yeah.
Nice.
At 6 o'clock down at the band show. So I could go on forever, but I will
Can't be worse than karaoke.
save it to the next time. No.
Councilmember Martinez.
No comment.
Kristen.
Sure. I just wanted to note that, I guess that this occurs as you age, but anyway, there was a young man who I was acquainted with from the north end, and a young man from the south end that I had a much longer childhood acquaintance with, that passed away this week and last week, neither of which obviously should occur, at the age that we're talking, and so my condolences go out to the friends and family. And one thing I noted is, social media is a great vehicle in which to convey your thoughts and feelings and fond times and moments and memories that you have with people, but people need to hear that real time, all the time. And so I would just say to folks out there, tell people those things directly when you can, as much as you can, because you just never know, as much as those folks may smile in your presence, what they have thoughts of when they're not.
I just want to note that this Sunday begins the Ruth Ann Monroe Summer Basketball League held at the Wheaton Park. This will be the 58th season. We have over 240 kids this year. That's 24 teams. It's a free event. The players, no charge for them to play. Their jerseys are free, thanks to our donors and our sponsors. And we have music and food and businesses. We support local businesses, even down to the marketing material we've been having lately. And I just want to give a special shout out to the league staff. We've been planning for months and months and months. And shout out to our players that keep coming back every year. And it's amazing to see these kids grow up to be young men and women. They're like super tall. I don't know what these parents was feeding these kids in the COVID pandemic, but they're huge. And a special shout out to our volunteers, our coaches, the parents, and all of the community members that want to keep this going and keep it safe and fun for everybody. That's it. Thank you.
I want to say, since we haven't met since the storm of June 28th, thank you to all those city workers, first responders, everyone who went out after that terrific windstorm blew through Hagerstown and took down trees and outed power and screwed up everybody's life for about 12 hours. I want a big shout out and a big thank you to all those people who were out there working in it completely until they restored everything and got everything cleaned up. So let you guys know and girls know you're very much appreciated.
I was approached at the Business Awards by Randy Scott, the owner of Chick-fil-A, to give a shout out to Jem Bender and to Rodney Tissue for their consistent and tremendous communication for what is going on that whole strip of where do we go whenever we need to go to Chick-fil-A, because it is, I don't know about you,
It's almost done.
I am a decent driver, but I'm like, where am I going? I don't know. I'm a good driver.
I believe you.
So just the fact that they're communicating with not only Randy, but probably all of the businesses in that section is just a tremendous compliment. So I wanted to make sure that they both know how much we appreciate them, and that Randy Scott, whenever he gives you a compliment, you listen. So anyway.
Could I add one thing to your thing?
I don't know.
It's fun. I was going to give Rodney and Jim a call, because you're coming out on Rhine Way from Lowe's, because you can't.
Oh, yeah.
You come across that way to try to get back out to come down Hazel Boulevard. That light, it needs something done to it bad. You can sit there forever before that light changes.
Before you turn left. Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
for ruining the compliment.
I know. Gosh.
Well, it's not Rodney and Jim's fault.
It's only the sensor on his car.
Just, well, trust me, it's, you can get traffic backed up there pretty good. So.
It's almost finished, though? It's almost finished? You say
It's almost ready,
yeah.
it's almost done, yeah.
Thank God.
August.
Oh, and I did hear that the fence is going to be ready at City Park,
Yes.
because I've received some complaints about the poor geese
Yeah.
that are just flying out into, the roads. So I hear
Almost
that
ready.
that's going to be finished soon, or constructed
That
soon.
fence has been on perpetual back order.
Yeah, I've heard some complaints about it, so
For months,
it's coming.
yeah.
Poor geese.
Good. I just wanted to start out by sending our condolences to Mayor Harriet Johnson's family, the first female mayor of Martinsburg, who passed away last week, as well as Colin Plaskaro, who was on our planning commission and was instrumental in getting our community garden together, passed away last week as well. So condolences to both of their families. We do have two requests for letters of support. The one's in front of you for Christ Instruments, and then the other I sent an email for the BMX National Championships. Are you guys okay with both of those?
Yes.
I mean, I'm good, I was just curious, wasn't real familiar, the Christ Instrument, I wasn't even really sure exactly. Otherwise, it says manufacturing devices for medical research industry, I just didn't know what.
They're on the corner of
Maryland
Maryland
and
Avenue and Howard or
Or
something.
Howard, yeah.
Yeah, they're right there to turn in to go to Crumpy's Alley.
They have some very interesting products on their website.
They made cages for
Yep.
governmental use for animal control, be it flying. They fly dogs in crates to, like army dogs and stuff like that. They do all that.
That sounds cool.
All right. And two positive things to end on. I want to give a shout out to Old Line Tattoo, who raised $11,160 for the Hagerstown Skate Park.
Tremendous.
Yeah, so that is pretty incredible.
It's almost 20 grand.
And thank you to Congressman Trone. They announced today that they have $500,000 for our Blight Initiative put in the final bill that goes to the Senate. So that's a huge win for us. Hopefully the Senate passes it, but we requested 250 and they got 500,000 included. So that will be really awesome for our community to get rid of some of this blight. And with that, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
I'm so glad to be back on this work table.
We'll get the air conditioning
Hello and welcome to Council Wrap. I'm Wes Decker, joined by Police Chief Joey Kiefer. I think you talked a lot about the subject during the meeting, but there are lots of nuts and bolts that you really needed to get across, not only to mayor and council, but also I think to reassure the public that what Hagerstown Police Department has been doing for a long time really falls under the umbrella of much of the legislation that was passed. Now, there are a few things that you discussed that you feel sort of, I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but sort of overreach to some degree because they do come from those who have never put on a pair of shoes to walk the beat. And I think that's one of the frustrating things for you as you expressed. And for me, I think when I look at this and I see some of what is mentioned, you know, this legislation is to increase accountability and restore public trust. But in listening to what you had to say during the meeting, I mean, what's to deter anyone from now filing a complaint against a police officer? I mean, to me, this legislation to some degree, and this is just me speaking, says if I've done something wrong, maybe it wasn't just me doing something wrong. Maybe I turn it around on that police officer somehow.
That's what, and that happens now. I mean, that's always happened, where, again, not broadly. I'm not saying that it's a huge issue, but we've had, members of our community that have filed complaints because they don't like that a certain officer knows the game they're playing, the illegal game they're playing, and they're onto them. They're onto them. They've found a way to stop that from happening. Even if it's not to the point of an arrest sometimes, but they're intervening in a way that keeps them from continuing that illegal business or whatever they're doing. And in recent years, they have found ways to find, for the lack of a better term, attorneys to pick up that notion and file suit against the city for things that clearly are not in violation. Clearly, it's a tactic, and the fear is that that's going to increase, and not increase in terms of numbers of people doing it, but increase in terms of the people that are just doing it more often. Right. I don't believe that our society is filled with people that just, how can they come out here and mess with the police? I don't believe that. I don't feel that. I've never felt that. But there is a segment of our population that, quite frankly, are in that criminal realm that have nothing to lose from doing so.
Exactly.
And if they can defeat a single officer, or believe they can defeat a single officer by doing these things, that's how they're going to go about it. And it may not be something that they can win officially, but if you have an officer who says, okay, I've had enough, I'm going to go do something else now. I'm not going to do this profession anymore. This isn't worth it for me. That's a problem. And that doesn't do what they were saying they wanted to do here. It's just that legislators in general, people in general, but when you're in the responsibility of creating law, look, we create policy, and sometimes we mess up, right?
Sure.
So I don't want to come across that I'm a legislative hater, because that's not what it is.
No.
But when you allow emotion to get in the way of logic sometimes, to think through, and you don't want to listen to what is being said to you that the outcomes could be, and then you pass these things anyway, then don't be surprised when things go bad in a way that you go, hey, because the answer is going to be, they're going to come back and go, Chief, why aren't you doing this? Why ain't this being done? Why is this happening? Why are these things increasing? And I can point back to legislation. In this case, I could point back and say, well, right here.
Right.
This right here was the reason why these things happened, which has caused me to be where I'm at. Yeah. And you didn't want to listen when we were trying to tell you that before. So now I still have to fix this problem. I still have to handle this stuff, but now my hands are a little bit more tied, and I've got men and women in the profession that are a little more, I don't want to say afraid, because they're not afraid. They're not afraid to do the job. That's why they got in the job. But they're a little more cautious that what they felt was some protection for what they were out doing and doing right and doing within policy
Sure.
is going to be in question, and they got to kind of they gotta kind of prove themselves twice.
Yeah.
And that's just not right. That's just not right.
No, and then their name potentially gets dragged through the mud, whether they did anything wrong or not, and sits out there on their record
Right.
for the next 3 years at least until they ask for it to be expunged, and then it goes through that entire process. I want to get back to something that I said up front, and again, I don't mean to keep beating this legislative drum, but this is where all of this came from, was from politicians deciding that this was a good idea. But I want to go back to a quote from Governor Hogan, who vetoed this legislation, and part of what he said was that these measures would further erode police morale, community relationships, and public confidence. So my question to you is, with the governor saying that, and then the other politicians, the legislators saying, no, this is what we feel is the best policy right now, overall, how do you think that this will affect your department and something that's been very difficult anyway, which is recruiting police officers?
Well, I'm gonna start with the recruiting side. We are currently not seeing a problem with the recruiting side. I've said this the last couple of academies, and I'll say it to this next group, and as I'm hiring new people right now, is that I applaud them. I mean, it takes a special person in today's world, today, not yesterday, today, to want to get in this profession, knowing what is being portrayed about this profession that you see on in the media realm. And again, not bashing the media, just, the way it comes across. So we're getting people in the door to do that. The problem is keeping people and keeping ones that's been on the job for 4 or 5, 6 years that kind of go, you know what, this just, my morale's down because I don't feel that support from the people that I work for. And I'm not saying city government, but just, and when you start taking away things that has been built as a protection for me, to allow me to go out and make those split-second decisions without the hindsight of someone with 20/20 vision come back going, well, wait a minute, you should have did this and you didn't. So therefore now this is going to happen to you. It is a problem. And Governor Hogan's quote is spot on, correct, that it has a morale effect. The public trust and the public confidence, what I think he meant by that, what I'm going to say that I mean by that, is that you're going to have you're going to have officers that are going to be more cautious about having interaction with members of our community, and by having less interaction creates distance, and with distance becomes what is going on here. That confidence doesn't happen anymore. You and I being able to have a conversation allows confidence to happen, that we know each other. If I stop talking to you because I'm afraid those complaints are going to come in, you lose confidence, even though you might not be the person making the complaint or ever going to make a complaint. You see an officer as being withdrawn or whatever, and when you do see him, it's because he's taken an action because he has to at that moment. He doesn't have a choice, and now you think that officer is something different than what he is. That's just theory and philosophy on my part, but that's very, very much, I think, something that could happen, which is what, I don't know if that's what he meant, but that's what I think, that I take from that comment that I think could happen.
Yeah, and for you and your department, that detracts from being able to solve crimes, because that confidence that you build with the community, for them to get in touch with you or your officers and let you know, especially, when something happens where nobody's around and you have to rely on the camera system or something like that, and then somebody might know something, they might hear something. They're not going to be as apt to come to you at this point, or the officer is going to be like, well, yeah, I don't know what this is all about. They're going to put that wall up because they're trying to protect themselves from.
And it may not be conscious. It may not be a conscious wall. It may be a subconscious wall that,
Sure.
That self-protection comes into play, where I don't know who's going to complain on me. So
Yeah.
therefore, I'm going to have.
If I don't put myself out there,
I'm just going to kind of, watch where I'm at and what I'm saying to people,
Right.
and you may come across, distant, and that doesn't create confidence and trust with your community. So I hope that's not what happens. I think it's incumbent upon me, a leader, to relay and make sure our guys know that they are safeguarded, that there are, they have that person that has their back, they have government here, city government has their back, and that they're being supported. So I'm hoping that, it doesn't get to that, but I think professionally, as a general profession, that's very much a concern, and I think Governor Hogan was spot on with that comment.
Do you believe, and I know this is a very broad question, but I'm going to put it out there to you, do you believe that the incidents that we saw nationally that really triggered this kind of reaction and these kind of policies being passed by legislators, do you believe that overall they were more due to the agencies or just bad apples as in individuals?
It's a good question. As I said earlier, there are agencies that have problems. Those agencies have had cultural problems within their agencies for a long time. And new leadership can come in and try to change that, but it's, I hate to keep using the word that seems to be a bad word anymore, systemic. But there are systemic issues within agencies, and I'm not talking racially systemic issues per se, but just the culture of how an agency runs, and acceptable practice of what people can do within an agency. And in big agencies, it tends to be a little more pervasive. I think in small agencies, when I talk about small agencies, we're talking about these 3- and 4-man police departments. The problem there is not that it's systemic in that it's a culture that has come into a learned behavior that way. It's just a learned behavior because of a lack of having people with knowledge there to teach that. So mistakes can happen, bad practices can come into play, and therefore with those things, in a small agency, bad policing happens because there's no one there to kind of correct that. And that's not a dig on small agencies, that's just a reality when you have a 3- and 4-man police department. Unless you're bringing someone on this police department that's been in another agency bigger for quite a long time that bring good skills with them, brand new people can learn bad behaviors.
Right.
And in big agencies, you can be anonymous. I mean, if you work for an agency that's got 3,500 officers, or, New York City agencies or Los Angeles County agencies that are huge and massive agencies,
Right.
You're an anonymous person in that agency. I mean, you really are.
Yeah, I mean, an easy way to look at that is, if you're a football player, you're one of 11 on the field.
Yeah.
If you're a basketball player, you're one of 5.
Right.
It's much harder for you to hide on the court
Right.
as a basketball player than as a football player.
Right, right. And very much. That's exactly right. And if you think about that, that's the problems that can happen in big agencies, and that's going to be there. That's just the nature of a big corporation anyway, right? And I think that chiefs around this country, and I don't want to point out specific agencies, and I mentioned just a few because of the size, but I think they're doing a really good job of trying to fix those issues that have been 50, 70-year issues that has been built into a culture of an agency.
Yes.
But when it comes to Maryland, again, there are big agencies and small agencies and mid-sized agencies, and some do it well and some do it not so well and some do it better than others. But the reality is that within those agencies, big, small, medium-sized, you can have some bad actors too.
Yeah.
And one bad thing happening doesn't mean that the agency approves that or accepts that or promotes that. But once it happens, that is what the sting is on that agency. And then you try to create laws to fix that one problem.
Yes.
And, we don't develop policy for something that happens once.
Right.
You develop policy for a general policy for things that generally do happen. If you have a once-in-a-lifetime thing, if you have a once-in-a-lifetime storm that's never going to happen again, you don't build a policy on storm protection and storm management. Why would you?
Yes.
So legislation historically happens where good, necessary ideas of change, and I'm not saying that we didn't need change in a police profession nationally, was needed. I agree with that. I'm not complaining about that or disagreeing with that. But you're using a broad brush approach in a way that there was better ways of dealing with it. And the sheriff and I both approached our Congressman Trone and others Delegate Cham and Senator Corderman, and we pitched the idea, if you want change, then adopt an accreditation standard. Now, the one we go through, which is CLIA, is a massive undertaking. A 3-4-man police department could not do it. It's impossible for them to do that. It's not manageable for them to do that. A very, very large agency would be very difficult as well. But it's an all-encompassing accreditation. You could narrow that accreditation down to a manageable level of use of force, of these issues that are specific, and you could make a Maryland-wide standard that's an accreditation standard that's not a legislative standard that allows for best practices and evaluation and oversight by people that do the job or that used to do the job, that know how it should be done and know how policy should be written and know how training should be done. And you could have that managed like we do and have done since 1994. And by doing that, now you can have a 3-man police department that can meet that standard, and a 3,500-man police department could meet that standard because it's very narrowly defined standard of accreditation and not the broad brush approach that we have, which is a CLIA standard, which takes us, an individual person has to do it along with multiple staff members all year long, every year to do that.
Right.
So that was the idea we pitched, and we pitched that idea because of just this reason. Out of all this legislation, a very large part of it we've already been in compliance with because we've been it's part of a CLIA standard that we do that has been picked up somewhere along the line. The idea that was pitched to legislators is part of the best practice standards in a large part of the way. Now, they wrote the legislation in ways that's not good, but that's where we were. And then when I talked to Congressman Trone, that was the idea pitched for the federal side, is that I had a conversation with him so that the issues that they were trying to do for police reform at a federal level use these standards because they work.
Right.
They absolutely work. Look at the agencies that have adopted these standards, and you will see that they don't have the issues that you see and hear and that you saw last year that were coming up. And those were horrible things that happened last year, and they were, they needed to be addressed. But this is the reality, is that legislators with good intent can take things too far. And some legislators have have a bias. It may not even be implicit. I think it's a bias with some legislators here in Maryland that they have an issue with law enforcement, period. And they were going to get an agenda done, their agenda, and they made sure some of these things got put in because it was their opinion about law enforcement that comes from wherever it came from. They weren't even trying to hide it. They weren't even trying to hide it.
Well, this should not be based on opinions, regardless. I mean, at least that's certainly my feeling. And I think when you talk about all of that and you look at this legislation, which has so many different components to it, I mean, it addresses a lot, as you pointed out during the council meeting. And I think it's akin to a doctor, trying to assess a malady when someone comes to them and trying to put it in a certain category and saying, well, this is whatever this is. Yet, in this particular case, there might be this issue that's also associated with it, but I'm still going to put it in this category and I'm going to prescribe this medication for it. But it's not going to fix that because it doesn't apply to all of the medical issues that this person is having, yet the doctors are going to say, well, go ahead and take this for now. And that's kind of where we are because it sounds...
I love the idea because what you're saying is, to use the analogy you're using, is that legislators have dictated that this is the only antibiotic that can be used.
100%.
For no matter what you have.
Yes.
And this one will not help you with this ailment because it took a different kind of antibiotic that we know will work over here.
Yeah.
This one does you no good, does nothing for you. Actually, might cause you harm. So it's a great analogy that it's akin to that. It's akin to saying that it has to be so specific that this is what happens. And as I said at the council meeting, I have always tried, and I've tried since being chief, that any changes, any decisions that I make, what is the butterfly effect of that decision? Because I can make an easy decision that I'm going to do X, Y, and Z because it fixes my problem right now.
Right.
But I didn't want to look forward thinking to see that, okay, it fixed it here, but it caused me more problem here over here. and now I gotta go fix that problem, and now I gotta go fix this problem, because I'm making these on-the-fly decisions. And I get it, emotions, the politics of the last year, dictated that not doing any legislation was bad for society. But it could have been done better if it would have just slowed down enough to say, let's listen to reason, let's make these changes, and if you need to make more changes later, you can.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can
can.
always amend what you initially put out
You
there,
know,
but man, you don't want to go too far in the first place.
But
the way I
when
see
you go too far, and I read some of the articles from some of the legislators that, we're the first to do X, Y, and Z,
Yeah, but-
and proof that we're making change in Maryland law enforcement. Yes and no. You've not done much change for me.
How about if the mantra was, we're the ones who did it right, not we're the ones who did it first?
yeah.
I mean, there's a big difference between
Yeah.
those two things. But just one more thing I wanted to ask you before I let you go, and that is, have you heard much feedback from your officers as it relates to this Public Information Act, what I would call almost an invasion of privacy based on the way that the act was written before, where all of these personnel records were 100% exempt. Anytime anybody asked for those, they were completely off the table. Now, they will be made available.
Well, and let me clarify on that, and I don't think I did that today in a council meeting. The personnel records of internal investigations, the only ones that are available.
The ones, a person in interest within that particular
It had to be a complaint of misconduct
Yes.
that
Yeah,
dealt
I'm
with
sorry,
that dealt with the public.
Yeah, I didn't state that
If it
100% accurate.
if it was a technical infraction, when I say
Right.
technical, you're showing up late for work,
Yeah.
or your uniform wasn't in line with what you should be wearing.
Yeah, you don't get to
That would
look
be no one gets rights
all of
to
that was
those.
done behind the
Yeah.
scenes between
Yeah.
the supervisor and the officer.
Yeah,
That's
you're
right, yeah.
taking too much sick time, whatever it is.
Right.
Those would not be acceptable. So this is only misconduct
Yes.
allegation type complaints. I can tell you that they're very much upset as I am.
Okay.
A lot more fearful.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones out there every day doing the work. They're the ones get these complaints. They're the ones at the beginning of their career, not at the end of their career. And, so I can say, and I've said this to others, that, I'm proud of the job that I've done in my career, the profession I've gotten into. I'm not, knowing what I know today, I don't know if I would want to do that coming into it today brand new and stay in the job with what's going on. My whole career, I felt there's been some protection that allowed me to do my job without fear of reprisal. And, as we hear from legislators talking about people fearing the police and the reprisal of police, and the mistreatment that we provide to communities, this is where we are, is that we have officers, men and women, who feel that with legislation like this, there is a fear that reprisal is coming their way for people that just have ill intent towards us. So if it's intended for us to have a feeling what people that are disenfranchised feel like when it comes to law enforcement, then you've succeeded. If that's what your success rate is, what you wanted, you may also have lost, because you may lose a huge amount of really well-trained, well-intended, good, law-abiding, intended people that are in this profession, or people that don't want to ever come in this profession that you really want to have in this profession. And that's the part that worries me as I eventually walk out of this profession, is who's going to step up and do this job behind me?
Yeah.
Is it the people that we want in this profession, or is it the people that we can only get in this profession?
Yeah.
Right now, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing really good people. I got 4 new people hired right now that are waiting to go to the next academy. I'm looking at 5 more probably getting ready to be brought on in the next month or so. I applaud them. They are top-notch people, what we're looking at their backgrounds, and I'm excited for them. And they don't know any better. This is the world they're coming into. When
Which
I
is
came into this job
probably
30
best.
years ago,
Yeah.
I knew what I was walking into, kinda.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
you don't know until you know, right?
Yeah.
But those of us who've been in the job for a while, those that have 5, 10 years on the job, that can go, you know what, do I really want to put
15 more years into this just to get the retirement. Is it worth it for me?
Yeah.
And those are those things that you lose that doesn't have a money value to it. That's experience. And experience on the
Yep.
street
An incredible intangible.
is the other part of that trust and confidence, is having people that can show up on a scene that you know is not going to make things worse because they've lived it.
Right.
They've got life experience in the job, and then you have a job, a profession where you have a bunch of men and women that have 3 years on the job or less. As good as they are, as great as they are, and as smart as they are, they don't have those professional life experiences that can help them in certain situations.
Well, it took some heinous actions by, as you put it, some bad actors to get legislation like this passed. In your estimation, what will it take to get this legislation amended at some point in time?
Well, I think you're starting to see some of it. You're not seeing it here in Hagerstown. I want to clarify that. But you're seeing a rising crime around the nation. And I'm not going to speak from knowledge but just from opinion, that I think part of it is the withdrawal of law enforcement to be involved in certain things, and the enacting of certain legislation that hampers our ability to do that. When you take away my ability to lock someone up for a crime they're committing, and you say that's no longer something we want you locking people up for, it has a butterfly effect that now allows them to do other. It creates an environment that allows people to think that they can do whatever they want. They can do whatever they want without consequence.
Yeah,
because you're making laws that tell me that. Then
it's complete anarchy.
And then anarchy starts to come in. And then there's going to be a need we need cops. We want cops to do X, Y, and Z. And then it's going to be people in the Maryland Chiefs and Sheriffs Association or national FOPs is going to say, then you need to take all these things that you did here and you need to turn them into something else.
Yeah.
And you need to start giving law enforcement what they deserve. We make mistakes, and we need to be updated. We need to have some reform as life goes on, because we represent what the community, what society wants from us. So if society says we no longer want to have people locked up for using marijuana, then society makes that decision and we adapt to it and change what we have to do. And I'm using that as a single example.
Right.
That's what we do over the course of our history, and we will continue to do over the course. It's what society wants from their law enforcement. What are you willing to accept as a society, as a civil society? And if you're saying this is now acceptable, then we change to adapt to that.
Right.
And then practices, training, the things that we do is a learned behavior of a profession over the course of a history of the profession. I mean, we do things differently than we did when I started, and we'll do things differently 30 years from now because things change, technology change, all those things change. And, it's just, these things make things harder, and I worry that it's creating an enabling society that says that we can do whatever we want. I can ride my dirt bike down the wrong way down the street and you're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And when that person hits a 80-year-old woman crossing the street because she didn't look the opposite way, and that happens, and that 80-year-old woman dies, and the family says, why didn't the police do something about that? And if I chase that guy on that motorcycle the wrong way and he crashes and dies, then I get blamed for that. Or he crashes in somebody else and hurts somebody, I get blamed for that. I'm not advocating for chasing people on motorcycles. I'm just saying there's a sense of entitlement that you can't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And the men and women in this profession and my police department see that more now than they ever have, and it's frustrating for them.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating for them.
I understand that. Very, very, very troublesome.
So I think this is going to take people like Senator Quarterman and Delegate Sham and members of this city council and county government to speak up to the delegations and say, you've got to take some of this stuff and fix it.
Yeah.
You got to do that.
Imagine that. Words coming from law enforcement and those who experience and deal with this
And the
themselves.
public. I think if the general public, people that want a civil society.
Yeah.
That
and want to be able to feel comfortable.
That see that what we're doing is valid and just.
Right.
And they see that bad policy, bad legislation has been implemented.
Mm-hmm.
Pick up the phone, write a letter, send an email, do what you got to do as your
your right as a citizen of this country to ask for that to be
Yeah.
fixed.
Right.
Most of this in here is not harmful. It's not. You want to create oversight, I encourage that because I'm not afraid of that.
Right.
In my police department, I'm not afraid of that. Some agencies might be. I'm not.
Yeah, that's not the issue here.
I'm not.
Yeah.
This is not something that scares me.
Yeah.
But these other things that hurt the men and women individually, I got a real problem with, and I will speak up, and certain people can not like me for what I'm saying, but I'm very passionate that those things are wrong. They should have never been here, and I'm against those. I will follow that law to the T. I'm not going to say not, but it is wrong. It is absolutely wrong.
Well, Chief, thank you for the candid conversation. Respect everything you do. Lots of respect from
I
this side of
appreciate
the
that.
table, for sure.
I appreciate that.
For Chief Kiefer, I'm Wes Decker. That's a wrap.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. I'll see you next time on Council Wrap.